Why is the movie Up by Pixar so incredibly good? It's one of my favorite movies. Well, there's a Danish professor in planning called Bent Flyberg who has written a book called How Big Things Get Done. Bent says that the Up movie makers use something he calls Pixar planning. And I think I can use Pixar planning to make my project, The Marble Machine, much better, to lift it up, if you so will. Until now, I've been scared of planning, but Pixar planning makes planning something you want to cuddle with. Welcome to A Better Design Process, Part 1, Planning Like Pixar. I need a better design process. I made 2 marble machines and they didn't do what I wanted them to do. I want to build a 3rd machine, but I don't want to make the same mistakes that I made earlier. So I want to learn to plan like Pixar. To explain why, I need to tell you about this fish. The fish is swimming in water. But do fish know about water? No. Fish actually doesn't even know about the existence of water, but they are still affected by it. And that's the important thing. So here is a designer. And the designer is swimming in his design process. But do designers know about the design process? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And in my case, I have been the fish swimming in the water. I've been a designer using a design process that I've been completely unaware about. It may sound strange, but I have never ever been conscious about what design process I have been using. Why is that? Well, I'm an artist. I do art. And in art, this is not uncommon. Paul McCartney has said that he doesn't even know how he writes his songs. This is par for the course for artists. We just do. And sometimes that turns out great. My Marble Machine video has 245 million views. With 245 million views, the project is an obvious success, but it still didn't do really what I wanted it to do. And neither did the Marble Machine X. I really want to play live on a stage, so that's why I need a better design process. And that's why I want to learn more about planning. 2 days ago, I was really scared about planning. I just hated the mere thought of it. But yesterday, I read How Big Things Get Done, and now planning is something I want to cuddle with. Pixar planning. Okay, so what is it and how did they do the movie Up? Well, they started with a script. And once they had a script, the director and a team of 5 to 8 artists turns the entire script into detailed storyboards that are photographed and strung together into a video that roughly simulates the movie to come. Now the whole movie exists in crude form. This is called an animatic. So above you have the animatic and below you have the finished scene in the movie itself. So you can really see the crudeness of the sketchiness of the animatic. I also noticed how extremely similar the two are. The angle is there, the perspective is there. Almost everything in the movie actually existed already in the sketch version, which I think is a very important detail. Now Pixar have the first version of the animatic. Next, Pixar employees, including many who have no other involvement in the project, watch the video. You can really feel when you have the audience and when you don't, without anybody saying anything, noted Doctor, the director of the film. The director also meets with a small group of other Pixar filmmakers called the Brain Trust who critique the film. And what they're doing then is that they're doing a second version of the animatic with the feedback from the viewing of the first one. And then the second iteration of the movie is shown to an audience and the director gets new feedback again. A Pixar movie usually goes through the cycle from script to audience feedback 8 times. And the amount of change between versions 1 and 2 is usually huge. 2 to 3 is pretty big, and then hopefully as time goes on, there are enough elements that work that the changes become smaller and smaller. The movie has been simulated, and planning is cheap. If a serious problem is discovered in version 5 of a Pixar movie and whole scenes need to be thrown out and redone, the amount of time and money lost is relatively modest. If the same problem is discovered when the movie is in production and whole scenes need to be thrown out and redone, it could be horrendously expensive, create dangerous delays, and possibly sink the whole project. Let's tie this together with the design process timeline of the marble machine. As we can see, I started the marble machine pretty much far to the right of this timeline. I started the marble machine X a little bit earlier, but the movie Up is starting right at the beginning, where iterations are cheap. Whereas I started to the right on your screen, where iterations are expensive. Something we really can take away from this is that if we solve problems as far to the left as possible, we can increase efficiency and improve results. Bent, the Danish planning professor, have called what Pixar did in their Animatic for a maximum virtual product. When a minimum viable product approach isn't possible, try a maximum virtual product. A hyper-realistic, exquisitely detailed model like those animatics that Pixar makes for each of its feature films before shooting. In Pixar's case, an animatic could be a maximum virtual product. What could a maximum virtual product for the Marble Machine project be? Well, cardboard, for example. What has blown me away with this book is that cardboard prototyping is also planning, okay? So this is another example where we can go from planning being scary to planning being playing around with cardboard, which is something I love. Here's the coin drop moment, okay? This is a potential design timeline for a good project. And the thing is that the iteration cycles, which means the time it takes to try something, to fail and try it again, that time takes longer the more closer to the end of the process you are. If you can see here to the left, you can see all the green dots here. They are super short, but when we move over here, the iteration cycle gets longer and longer. If we have a problem that I'm used to solving over here, and we can move it and solve it here, like Pixar did with their Animatic, we can work faster with improved results. A lot of you know that I blamed the failure of the Marble Machine X on the form factor, that it looked too much like the first machine. I actually am revising that idea entirely. The form factor is not the culprit. The design process is the culprit. Because I didn't start from the beginning on the Marble Machine X. I just started in the middle, where iterating takes a long time and is expensive. If the third machine is going to make it, I need to start from the beginning. And it feels honestly like this video is part 1 of the new Marble Machine project, because it feels like I finally have this coin drop moment that we can't just begin a design process in the middle of it. We will lack so much things. So here's how I looked at the phases so far. It's almost like phase 3, I call that building. Phase 2, I call that designing. And phase 1, I call that something that I think I made up myself, theoretical design, which is scary, okay? This horrible theoretical design dragon with all its horrible minions just scares me, and I just want to stay away from them. Look at problem definition, for example, design requirement, concept generation, which I made a very good point that concept generation is actually only called brainstorming, but these things have this unnecessary complicated language that just scares a creative artist away. It's almost like engineers want to scare other people away with their horrible naming of stuff. Design sequence, research, concept evaluation, and weighted decision matrix, which means which idea is best, basically. And just like concept generation got a little bit less scary when you realize it's actually just brainstorming, in the same way, planning that used to be scary can be fun and something you want to cuddle with if you turn it into an active act of experimentation and play, for example, playing with cardboard. So yes, I used to be a designer, not aware about the design process, but no more. This book have made me see the light, and I think my machine will fly up high in the sky if I use Pixar planning. Look how happy I am. Or how happy I was a year ago, which I think the picture is from. Wait, you say. Wait, Martin. Aren't you just falling into a planning rabbit hole here? Shouldn't you just build a machine instead? You should move fast and break things. I mean, just do it. Can't ignorance be your friend? Planning ruins projects, some say. Just get going. Trust your ingenuity. But this the Danish planning professor says, is a wonderful sentiment backed by superb stories. But is it true? He also says that planning is a concept with baggage. For many, it calls to mind a passive activity, sitting, thinking, staring into space, abstracting what you're going to do. That's exactly how I felt about planning until 2 days ago. But Bent wrote something in the book that stuck with me. Projects don't go wrong, they start wrong. And I think that is very, very apt for my Marble Machine projects so far. Okay, but what does this actually mean concretely for the Marble Machine project? Well, I'm going to plan some ways to do a maximum virtual product for the Marble Machine. It could be cardboard modeling or a digital twin or both or other things. I am going to plan a proper design sequence, and I'm going to plan how to best leverage the available resources I have and more. For example, the Marble Machine Discord engineering server is an amazing resource for my project. And I am going to think hard about how to make the interactions with all the engineers more efficient. Things like that. But I have picked out my personal highlights from this book, and I want to share them with you. How is a vision turned into a plan that becomes a triumphant new reality? And I'm like, I have two things there. I already have the vision. I know that I will be able to produce a triumphant new reality, or that's kind of my gut feeling. I know I can make something amazing, but I do not have the word in the middle here, a plan. At least not until today. I'm starting to make one now. And we start with make haste slowly. To understand the right way to get a project done quickly, it's useful to think of a project as being divided into two phases. First, planning. Second, delivery. So my setup with my 3 phases I can discard, and instead we can simplify the design process timeline to start with planning and then delivery. And I am going to enter a planning stage of my project from now on. All the work I've done up till today have not been spent in vain. I've learned a lot of things about my project, but that doesn't mean I can cheat and start in the end. I need to start with the planning segment because planning is a safe harbor. The costs of iterations are relatively low. And then a famous example. Abraham Lincoln is reputed to have said that if he had 5 minutes to chop down a tree, he'd spent the first 3 sharpening the axe. That's exactly the right approach for big projects. Put care into the planning phase and you'll ensure that the delivery phase is smooth and swift. Here's a super fun one that you'll enjoy. I have some bangers coming up for you later. On project after project, rushed superficial planning is followed by a quick start that makes everybody happy because shovels are in the ground. But inevitably, the project crashes into problems that were overlooked or not seriously analyzed and dealt with in planning. People run around trying to fix things. More stuff breaks. There is more running around. I call this the break-fix cycle. A project that enters it is like a mammoth stuck in a tar pit. Can we think about a mammoth stuck in a tar pit that we all know and love? Well, if the Marble Divider redesign 5-6 videos with different designs of a Marble Divider of Marble Machine X isn't the best example of a break-fix cycle, I don't know what is. Like a mammoth stuck in tar pit. Chapter 2, the Commitment Fallacy. Bent is here using a very interesting case study, the Pentagon. So there was this guy, Somervell, who wanted to build a Pentagon, and Somervell had picked a building site for the building. When the plans were announced to the public, they hated the idea of having a building at that site. Somervell's plan was so absurdly rushed and superficial that no one had even looked for other sites. They had all treated the first suitable site identified as the only suitable site and hurried to get construction going as quickly as possible. And this is fundamentally typical for how big projects come together. Purposes and goals are not carefully considered. Alternatives are not explored. Difficulties and risks are not investigated. Solutions are not found. And Bent calls this the commitment fallacy. I was so close at falling for the commitment fallacy myself, when I did this design. I don't know if you remember, but I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go for it. And I know I want modules, so everything has to be 90 degrees. And I know I want functionality, and I want to disregard aesthetics. So I made this machine, and I was like, I started making plans to build this summer in Germany. That would have been the commitment fallacy. I just want to start. I just want to get going. I remember several people writing on the Marble Machine Discord server, hang on, it feels like Martin is starting the project yet again at the wrong place. To everyone who wrote that to me, that reached me and it stopped me. And it started these investigations that I'm doing now. Where on the design process timeline do you think this new machine would have started? I would say just here. A little bit before Marble Machine X, but that wouldn't have been enough. I would have had a machine that I didn't love, and I would spend another 5 years on a project that failed, and that would probably be my last try. And what's funny, what saved me also from not committing the commitment fallacy was the design requirement process that you all had me doing, which is part of the theoretical design. Because when I started write design requirement, I had to ask myself, why am I doing this project? What's the goal with the project? And that's when I made the video that everyone liked. I just realized why I'm doing the Marble Machine project, where I realized that this CAD was the commitment fallacy. So Bent writes, if you feel the urge to commit, and you probably will, commit to completing a planning process before you draw conclusions about your big project. At first, commit to having an open mind. That is, commit to not committing. I actually love that. So a desire to get going on a project, to see work happening, to have tangible evidence of progress is normal. That's good. Everyone involved in a project should have that desire. It becomes trouble only when we belittle planning as the annoying stuff we have to deal with before we really get going on the project. And planning is working on the project. Progress in planning is progress on the project, and often the most cost-effective progress you can achieve. This is exactly the point I've been missing all these years. Planning is working on the project. Commit to not commit. Make planning something you want to cuddle with, y'all. And I'll see a bright future ahead of each and every one of you. Best regards, Professor Martin. Okay. Chapter 3. Think from right to left. Projects are often started by jumping straight to a solution, even a specific technology. That's the wrong place to begin. You want to start by asking questions and considering alternatives. Start with the most basic question of all, why? Artists never ask why. Engineers and designers ask why. I need to learn from them. Why are you doing this project? Few projects start this way, all should. And on this image, we are seeing the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, which is another case study from the book. And the story about this is really, really enlightening from a project perspective. So the leaders of Bilbao wanted to increase tourism. They had this idea of an abandoned building, originally built in 1909 as a wine warehouse, to be the future home of a grand museum. So Bilbao City asked Frank Gehry if he wanted to do this renovation, and then Bent writes here, another architect might have simply said no thanks and walked away, or yes and got into work. But not Gehry. He asked questions starting with a fundamental one. Why are you doing this project? They explained why to Frank, and they said, yeah, we want to increase tourism and we want to have this impressive museum that we want to build. Frank had spotted like a better place for a building that he thought, so he gave the answer, forget the renovation, he said. Let's build a new dazzling museum on that riverfront site instead. And this was the result. The Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao turned out like just a mega success. This project by Frank Gehry's genius was shaped by the project's goal. Frank dared to meet the monster of problem definition and ask, why do you want to build this museum? Okay, you want to attract people? Well, let's do it this way. It's shaped by the project's goals. Developing a clear, informed understanding of what the goal is and why, and never losing sight of it from beginning to end, is the foundation of a successful project. I call this thinking from right to left, which means that we are more interested in what happens over here. We don't start and tinker, mathematics, here, tinker, 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 and perhaps we have something at the end. No, we clearly answer the question, what do we want the end to look like? And that make our end result shaped by the project goals. That enable successful projects like the Guggenheim Bilbao Museum. In chapter 4, the chapter about Pixar, Bent is also using Frank Gehry and the Guggenheim Museum as an example of fantastic planning. The beginning of the design process for this museum looked very much like Pixar's process actually. So the architect is working with wooden blocks of various sizes that he stacks. First one way, then another, looking for something that seems functional and visually pleasing. Gehry started with a preliminary block model, then added scraps of white paper twisted into various shapes. He studied each change intently and discussed whether it should be kept or removed. What Frank Gehry, the architect, is doing here is that he is experimenting and experiencing. He is playing. And it's in the planning stage of a project like this. So he was also using cardboard as a planning tool. But then they started to also use simulation software called Katya. And with that simulation software, they built a digital twin. So the Guggenheim architect says here, in our practice, we do not allow the client to start construction until we are sure we're doing a building that's within their budget and meet their requirements. We use all the technology available to us to quantify in the most precise way the element of the build, so there's not a lot of guessing. And everybody wants things done yesterday, but what I'm constantly trying to do is slow things down, he says. Take time to develop ideas, take time to spot and correct problems. Do it on the drafting table, not the construction site, and that means the project gets done faster. So when a minimum viable product approach isn't possible, try a maximum virtual product. Chapter 5, are you experienced? Big projects routinely do not make maximum use of experience. In fact, experience is often aggressively marginalized. Planners don't value experience to the extent they should because they commonly suffer yet another behavioral bias, uniqueness bias, which means they tend to see their project as unique one-off ventures that have little or nothing to learn from earlier projects. And we can easily say that the Marble Machine project suffer from a lot of uniqueness bias, that's very clearly. Bent says that technology is frozen experience. And if decision makers valued experience properly, they would be wary of a technology that is new because it is inexperienced technology. Avoid the uncertainty of innovative methods. Whenever possible, planning should maximize experience. And here's a banger. Use off-the-shelf technology. So let's take an example that you all will love. Technology is frozen experience. A bearing housing from SKF captures that 100 years of frozen tested experience. My bearing housing just doesn't capture that value of frozen experience. Instead, it brings uncertainty, which is why all of you haters were correctly right in hating on that, on that design. Can ignorance be your friend? Chapter 7. Planning ruins projects, some say. Just get going, trust your ingenuity. It's a wonderful sentiment, but is it true? And this is where we're going to learn what the movie Jaws, Jimi Hendrix, and the Marble Machine has in common. Just do it. I love Jimi Hendrix and I love this story. So the story is that Jimi Hendrix wanted to build his own recording studio. He named it Electric Lady Studios, and the project was a disaster. They ran into so many things, and basically Jimmy ran out of money and he was paid with bags of cash, literally, and they would fly the bags of cash to the project managers so they could start building the studio again. So much was wrong with the project, and it became a huge success. Even though there was no planning and it went so far over budget, Electric Lady now is the oldest active music studio there is, I think he wrote. The value it has created over time is just immense. So the project started bad, but became a huge success. Bent writes, Jimmy got lucky. So did Spielberg and Sydney. So what happened with Spielberg? Well, there is a documentary about the movie Jaws. And the documentary is called The Shark Is Not Working. And this story is amazing. When they were recording this film, they had mechanical sharks, remote controlled. In the documentary, you can hear over their intercoms, like, shark's not working, the shark's not working. So they had to skip so many takes, which meant that the director ended up with almost no useful footage of the shark. So instead of focusing on mechanical sharks, making the movie into a B-movie that looked corny, the director focused on the horror of the humans thinking about the shark under the water. Basically, we do not see the sharks for half the movie. So as a spectator, you're just dreading this looming evil, and you feel the dread more because you haven't seen the shark yet. The project was a disaster, which turned into a huge success, just like Jimmy's studio. So why is Bent mentioning Sydney? That's the Sydney Opera House, famous as one of the world's most loved buildings. The building of the Opera House was a huge disaster. The architect didn't figure out how to build the domes, so they started building and they had to dynamite parts away, and instead of taking 4 years, it took 14 years and went over budget by X amount. But nowadays, of course, it's known as the Sydney Opera House, and it's a huge success. The Marble Machine almost didn't work at all. The video, huge success. So Jimmy's studio, My Marble Machine, the movie Jaws, Sydney, the Opera House, they all had this in common, that they got lucky, more or less. There maybe was some seeds of quality in there that saved the project, but they were messy and costly. And put simply, the typical project is one in which costs are underestimated and benefits are overestimated. And I'm scared that that is true for my current Marble Machine project, because there are always other costs that never appear on any spreadsheet when a project spirals out of control. The simplest are what economists call opportunity costs. I've been doing this for 8 years. During 8 years, I've not been able to write music. I have an opportunity cost of all the music I'm not making for going into this project. That's a cost that, when you think about it, is pretty big. So thinking about costs like that, it's even more important that I get this right this time. It would feel horrible to have paid 8 years of missed music career opportunity cost for this thing and giving it the third time's the charm and then fail again. And that's why I want to take this absolutely seriously this time, to really make sure I can get it right. I want to make a better design process, because project doesn't go wrong, they start wrong, okay? So a better design process requires a better starting place, and my starting place in this design process is radical agnosticism. And that's the mindset I need to use to start the project at the better starting place. Really asking why and be open-minded. Think slow, act fast. I don't want to be the designer fish unaware of the designing process water I'm swimming in. I want to deliberately form and shape a design process that can lift the Marble Machine project up, okay? Thank you so much to all the new patrons and YouTube members that joined since last week's video. I can now have more help from Hannes editing these videos for you. So your support gives me more time to actually work on my project. So yeah, good luck with everything you are doing. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you on the next one. Ciao.